Johnny Carson ruled late-night television for 30 years. Night after night, he brought the biggest stars into American homes with his charm, humor, and smooth interview style. His show felt relaxed and honest, a place where celebrities would let their guard down and show who they really were. But that honesty also revealed something darker. As America slowly changed its views about race, some famous guests exposed prejudices they usually kept hidden. Old Hollywood attitudes clashed with a new generation that was becoming more aware of racism. Carson had to balance respect for legendary stars with the growing discomfort around their outdated beliefs. He couldn't simply stop inviting them, many were huge names, but he also couldn't ignore the things they said. Over the years, viewers could see subtle shifts in his body language, his tone, and the way he handled certain guests who revealed racist attitudes on air or through their public statements. These moments show how complicated America's conversation about race was during the decades when Carson hosted The Tonight Show. John Wayne was one of Carson's most iconic guests. To millions, Wayne represented the tough, heroic cowboy who stood for justice and American values. But the image didn't match the man behind it. In a now infamous 1971 Playboy interview, Wayne openly stated that he believed in white supremacy until black people reached what he called a point of responsibility. He defended colonizers taking Native American land, calling indigenous people selfish for wanting to keep it, and dismissed the idea of racism in Hollywood altogether. These weren't misunderstood comments, they were clear and intentional. Carson still interviewed Wayne before and after the interview became public, but viewers noticed a shift. The warmth faded, Carson stayed respectful, but the easy friendliness between them disappeared. He never confronted Wayne directly, but the distance was obvious. It showed how Carson was trying to navigate the tension between honoring a Hollywood icon and quietly acknowledging how harmful Wayne's real beliefs were. Wayne's Tonight Show appearances now stand as examples of how beloved entertainers could hold deeply racist views that clashed with the values they publicly claimed to represent. Bob Hope presented a different challenge. He was one of America's most trusted entertainers, a man who dedicated decades to performing for troops and appearing in countless films, radio shows, and TV specials. But Hope's early comedy leaned heavily on racist jokes, blackface, and ethnic stereotypes. While many performers later admitted their past material was wrong, Hope rarely apologized or even reflected on it. He insisted it was simply the way things were and viewed criticism as unnecessary political correctness. Even into the 1970s and 80s, he occasionally slipped racially insensitive jokes into his Tonight Show appearances. Carson almost never laughed at these moments. Instead, he gave tight smiles and quickly changed the subject. He respected Hope's legacy, but he knew the jokes didn't fit the world anymore. Hope's refusal to adapt showed how some older entertainers resisted new conversations about racism, seeing them as attacks on comedy rather than acknowledgments of real harm. Charlton Heston was another complicated figure, known for portraying heroic, commanding characters in films like The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur. He later became a political symbol. Through his leadership of the National Rifle Association, he increasingly made statements that dismissed systemic racism and criticized civil rights activists. Carson tried to avoid letting the show turn into a political stage, especially as Heston grew more outspoken. Writers were instructed to keep things light, steering conversations toward movies and away from politics. Behind the scenes, however, staff recalled Heston making comments about civil rights leaders that felt racially insensitive or dismissive. On air, Carson stayed polite, but the warmth faded over time. Heston's public image as a heroic liberator clashed with his real-life attitudes toward racial issues. Creating a contradiction, Carson quietly tried to navigate without confrontation. Don Rickles created an entirely different problem. His comedy was built on insult humor, and he attacked everyone black, white, Jewish, Asian, celebrities, strangers without hesitation. But many of his jokes relied on racial slurs and stereotypes that would have destroyed another comedian's career. Somehow, Rickles had a strange permission from audiences and even from friends like Sammy Davis Jr., who often laughed with him despite being targeted by his jokes. Carson loved Rickles personally, which made things more complicated. Rickles pushed boundaries that other guests could never cross. Carson allowed him more freedom, but he also set limits. At one point, he reportedly told producers that if Rickles used a certain racial slur again, they would cut to commercial immediately. Rickles argued his jokes were equal opportunity, but critics pointed out that many of them still punched down, reinforcing stereotypes rather than challenging them. Carson's friendship with Rickles created a gray area where offensive humor was tolerated more than it would have been from anyone else. Burt Reynolds brought a different kind of problem. He was handsome, charming, funny, and audiences loved him. But growing up in the segregated South left him with certain blind spots. Most of the time he was respectful and warm, but he occasionally made racially insensitive comments on air. One Tonight Show segment, where Reynolds joked about Native Americans, drew hundreds of angry letters. Carson responded quietly but decisively. He ordered the footage removed from reruns for years. He didn't confront Reynolds publicly because they had a friendly relationship, but he still made sure that the offensive content didn't continue airing. Reynolds' case showed how even well-liked stars with good intentions could reveal harmful attitudes shaped by their upbringing. Skelton, a comedy legend from an earlier era, brought the most old-fashioned attitudes of all. He came from a time when blackface and racial caricatures were considered normal parts of entertainment. Unlike some performers who later admitted this was wrong, Skelton defended it. He complained about networks becoming too sensitive about race and blamed political correctness for ruining traditional comedy. Whenever he raised these points on The Tonight Show, the mood in the room shifted. Carson admired Skelton deeply, but he also understood that younger audiences no longer found that kind of humor acceptable. He tried to respect Skelton while gently steering the conversation away from his outdated opinions. Viewers could feel the gap between the legend's past and the present audience's expectations. These guests show how Johnny Carson spent decades walking a tightrope. He was the bridge between old Hollywood and a changing America. He respected the achievements of older stars, but also recognized the harm in many of their outdated views. He rarely confronted them directly, but he often adjusted his tone, editing decisions, and interview style to reduce the impact of their racist attitudes. The evolution of Carson's reactions mirrors the evolution of America itself, still struggling, still learning, and still uncomfortable with the prejudices of its past.